everybody for joining us for a new webinar here with Mix with the Masters, doing a new webinar every day for the past 5 weeks during the lockdown. I hope you guys are safe, staying at home. It's been exciting so far, but we have a very, very special guest today, and we're very excited to welcome the legendary engineer Al Schmitt is here with us today to answer some of your questions. It's a true honor, and we love Al. Thanks, Al, for doing this and being with us today. I hope yourself. How are you?
You're talking to me, Victor? I'm good. I'm feeling good today. Today's a good day, and beautiful weather here in Southern California. A little warm, but good.
Thanks. We have a lot of people already connected, and some early birds showed up to put their questions in early. So I think Tudor is going to read a couple of questions for you.
Okay.
From Sarmad, right?
Yes, I'll start with Sarmad. So, hello, and thank you so much for doing this. How do you know when your mix is done?
Wow, how do I know when my mix is done? Usually, I try to do a few mixes a day, but in most cases, what I do is I get my mixes done in one day, then I go home, come back the next day, and recheck everything out. I might make an adjustment here and there, but usually that's it. That's when they're finished. I know they're done when I feel good about the mix, and I can walk around the room and listen and not have to worry about critiquing anything at that point.
Cool. We have a next question from Connor Wallace. Hello, Al. Thank you so much for doing this. What was your most challenging mix and why? Greetings from Spain.
Wow, my most challenging mix and why? Boy, that's a hell of a good question. Trying to think now. Oh, you know what? I think when I mixed Peg for Steely Dan, that was probably the most challenging mix. And one of the reasons we were mixing on a quad 8, and there wasn't any automated faders at that time. So it was, and there were a lot of little things that had to be done. So I was at the mixing board, and then a couple of the guys from Steely Dan and Gary Katz, the producer, we all had little things to do, and we'd get done with the mix, and I would do my part, and I'd say, "Oh man, that was great," and Gary would say, "No, I didn't get the echo right," and we'd have to do another mix, and then Gary would get the echo right, and I would get something wrong. So we kept going. It took 12 hours to do the mix on Peg. So I don't know if you listen carefully to Peg, but it sounds pretty good, and I'm real happy with it. And I know Elliot was happy. He was the Elliot China. He was the engineer who did the recording. So he was happy. That was probably the most challenging mix I've ever done.
Great. We have a next question from Base Place. So, hi from South Africa. What is your general mix? Yeah. What is your general mixing philosophy or creative approach?
Okay, my creative approach mostly is I start a mix like I'm building a house, and I start from the bottom up. So obviously I get the bass and the kick drum, and I get them in the position where I'm happy, and I can hear both clearly with some space, and I keep them both in the center of my mix. Then I'll start with the rest of the drums, and I'll get the drums spread out the way I like them, with the hi-hat on the left always for me, and then left overhead, right overhead. And I get the toms spread out the way I want them. Then I go from there to maybe the guitars and fit the guitars in where I want. And sometimes I'll move the guitar from the left side to the right side. I try to keep the guitar on the left side and the high end of the piano on the right side. So I get that clarity between the two. And that's the way I go about it, depending on if I have background voices. I put the lead singer in at at every little point to make sure I still hear it and it's still in the right place. And then I take that out and I'll add some other things, whether it's strings or brass or saxophones, and then I'll punch the vocal back in and to make sure it's still sitting right where I want it. After all, the vocal is the most important part of the mix. I mean, if you can't hear the vocal or what they're singing about, you can lose a lot of the emotion. Anyway, it's from the bottom up, and that's the way I've been doing it all my life.
Great. We also have people that are saying hi to you, Al. For example, from Stefano. He says, "Hello,
Stefano, hi
Al.
Stefano.
Hello, Al. It is a pleasure to see and listen to you. Ciao from Italy."
Yes, and I hope he's safe. He and his wife. His wife is a nurse there, and so she's every day on the front line with this coronavirus. And God bless her, and let's hope she stays safe.
Thank you. We have a next question from Arias Reed. Good day, Al. What personal traits, facilities, or individuals do you credit to your success? Thanks for doing this.
Well, one of the things is I was born, I guess, with it. I have incredible concentration, and so I can be on a mix, and people have this happens all the time. I'll be on a mix, and the door will be open, and the musicians from the other studio will walk in. I won't even know anybody's there. I stay so focused on what I'm doing, and it's a gift I have, I guess, that given to me from somewhere, and so I am able to concentrate. And I think that's one of the most important things is concentrating on exactly what you want an instrument to sound like or a vocal where you want it to be. So I think the concentration is the most important thing. To not worry that the building could fall down around me and I'd still be in there mixing.
Great. Next question from Jagoda Sadowska. Hi, Al. Thank you so much for doing this. You're such a legend. Could you please talk about your vocal chain for tracking and mixing? Thanks.
My vocal chain. Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And thanks about the legend thing, but that's a bunch of baloney. Anyway, my vocal chain is depending on the vocal, whether it's male, female, and I usually can figure out what microphone I'm going to use before with somebody like Diana Krall or when I work with Paul McCartney. We use the a Neumann U47, and I love that. And it goes into a Neve preamp, and then from the Neve preamp, it goes into a Fairchild compressor, and I just tap it, maybe about 2 dB. And that's pretty much the chain. I ride gain on the vocal. I learn the song as quickly as I can, so I know the high points and the low points, and I'm able to use what I do a fader riding. So when it gets real loud, I'm toning it back a little bit, and when it gets real soft, I'm raising it a touch, and then the compressor. I don't use much compression at all, but I love the sound of the tubes in the Fairchild compressor, and it gives a warmth and a presence to the vocal that I like. And pretty much every one of my vocals I've been doing for the last 10 years or so have been that way.
Great. We have a next question from Spectra Sessions. Please talk about which new LDC mics are best. Thanks, Jim.
What microphones? I'm sorry.
From LDC.
I don't know what mic that is.
LDC? I don't know, maybe. But we can go to the next question if you want.
Yeah. Go to the
Cool.
next one.
A question by Connor Wallace. How do you usually create space for each instrument in the mix? Thanks.
Well, I use 8 to 10 different reverbs. I'll use one or two live chambers, the Capital Live chambers. I have a Bricasti. I have a 480 that I use. Uh, one side small in stage, the other side medium in stage, um, and so I don't put more than one thing in each reverb. And so that gives some clarity to what I'm doing. If you put too many things in the same reverb, it starts getting a little mushed up for me. So that's why I use so many different reverbs. Um, I prefer on the vocals, I'm using a live chamber, and sometimes I'll add a touch of my Bricasti to the live chamber. And then I make a blend of the two, and then a bell goes off in my ear when I hit the right spot, and it tells me, yeah, that's it, that's where you want to be. So the clarity comes from not putting too many things in one reverb. Um, so that gives me plenty of clarity, and I can adjust each reverb to what I want. So that's pretty much it.
Great. I'm gonna go back to the question before. So by LDC, I mean large diaphragm condenser microphone.
Oh, large condenser microphones.
Yeah.
Oh, well, um, I don't use a lot of condenser microphones, mostly tube microphones, what I use, or ribbon microphones. So condenser microphones, I'm not sure what I've been using lately with them. I really don't have a good answer for that.
Okay. We have a question from Fabrizio. Hello from Italy. You started working with a mono recorded with no comp or EQ until I'm sorry, I don't understand. Until today, which do you think are the most important skills to make records sound great? Thank you.
Oh, wow. I think the most important skills to make records sound great are to know what you're using, what kind of a desk you're on, number one, that helps a lot, and preamps. But most important are what microphones you're using on what instruments and where you place them. And I go out and listen to the instrument or whatever, and then I come back in and listen, open the microphone. And if I don't hear what I heard outside, I go back out, I readjust the microphone, and then come back in. Sometimes I'll make 2 or 3 trips to where I get the mic in the right spot to where I'm happy with it. I think one of the most important things for any engineer is to know his microphones, whether they're Royal Ribbons or Mojaves or Neumann or you name it, um, is to know what microphones, how they sound, and what they're going to give you. Um, I think that's the most important thing. I was blessed by having a great engineer, Tom Dowd, as my mentor. And that was the first thing he taught me was to go out, make sure you hear what the sound is that you're trying to capture, and then go inside the control room and make sure you're hearing that. And you might have to move the mic or even change the microphone. And I've done that more than once. So, it's important to get it right at the beginning. And then, that old story about fix it in the mix, that's a bunch of baloney. If you get it right in the first place, you don't have to worry about fixing it in the mix.
Cool. Speaking of Tom Dowd, we have a question from Jesse Miller saying, Happy birthday. Thank you so much for sharing your mentorship. Do you have a good Tom
Oh,
Dowd story you could tell?
oh God. There's so many stories about Tommy. Um, One of them was that Tommy and I, when we started, we were just cutting on acetate. We didn't even have a tape machine. So we would cut 3 songs on a 16-inch transcription disc, and then we cut maybe three more takes on another transcription disc. Then we took both of those and put one take one, two, and three would be on one turntable, and take 4, 5, and 6 would be on another turntable. And then a producer liked the beginning of take one, but he liked the ending of take 4 best. So Tommy and I had these turntables with a volume control on them. And we were doing acetate editing. We'd make a mark on the disc where we wanted to fade in, and on the other where we wanted to fade out. And we'd start one, and when we get to that point, I would start to fade out, and he would start to fade in, and we would try to do an edit to another disc that we were cutting at 78 RPM. And I got to tell you that it worked rarely. We wasted more acetate discs. It got to the point where the guy that owned the studio was getting pretty upset with us because we were wasting so many discs. Anyway, so that's one story. The other story was, that Tommy always dressed nice and he always looked great, and he and my Uncle Harry, who was another one I learned from, taught me how to always look nice, how to always smell good in the studio. Don't, come in smelling like a goat. You're going to be around people in close proximity in the control room, and you want to make sure that you smell good and you look good. Does that answer that?
Great, yes. We have a next question from Michael Gormley. Hi, Al. What habits have served you well through your career that you think more upcoming engineers could adopt? Thank you.
Okay. Well, the most important habit that I have is always being on time. And by that, I mean if a session starts at 12, I'm there at 9 in the morning. We're always early. We always check out all the microphones, make sure all the phasing is good. In other words, it's an old Boy Scout thing, like be prepared. And when the musicians walk in, you want to be prepared, know everything's working. So you can say hello to the guys, they sit down, they start playing. When you push up a fader, it's going to work. I think that's the most important thing, is to make sure everything is in phase, everything's working, and you're using all the right microphones, and they're all clean and working clearly.
Great. We have a question again from Rias Reed. Can you share any business advice that you have learned over the years? Is there any advice you could give for an assistant working under a producer in LA studios?
Advice, if you're working with a really good producer, and pay attention to what he's doing. You learn from different people. I mean, if you're an assistant at a studio, you might be working with 5 different producers over the course of a month or so. And there are different things that each guy brings to the table. And you want to learn what things you like best from each guy. And then you incorporate that in your arsenal so that you've learned, hey, I watched David Foster do this, and I like what he did there. So I'm going to try to incorporate that. The best thing is to always listen, learn, and ask questions. And ask questions at the right time. Wait until maybe the song is done, and then you can get the guy aside and ask him, hey, why did you do that? I saw you do this. Why did you do it that way? And most good engineers or good producers will tell you why, because most of us don't have secrets. And we're all, listen, that's how I learned, and I'm always willing to help others learn. And I think most good engineers and good producers feel the same way.
Great. We have a next question from Jagoda. Could you please talk about your mix bus? Thank you.
My mix bus. Oh, well, when I get my mix done, it goes out from the console to a Tube Tech 3 band, and then from that it goes to um, and I can't think of the name of the model right now, but to a high end that I add the extreme high end up around 20,000, and I add a little bit to that, and in the mix bus in the Tube Tech, I'll set that, and it's just tapping a little here and there, and then I go back and forth from my mix to what I'm getting back from the Tube Tech, and I go back and forth, readjust. It takes a little time, but then I get it to set to where I want it, and that's it. Then we print and go from there.
Great. We have a next question from Marcelo Cruz. Hi, Al. How do you get the sound of Jeff Porcaro's drums?
You got to get Jeff Porcaro to do that. I mean, I at one point, this is before I did Toto 4 with Jeff. We worked on about 12 albums in a row, from Randy Crawford to, so many different artists. And yeah, I put, a D112 on the kick. Back then on the snare, I was using, trying to think on the snare back then. Anyway, on the overheads, I was using 67s. On the toms, sometimes I used Gefels, German microphones, which Bill Schnee used all the time, and I picked up that little trip from him, and so that's pretty much it. And then, listen, if you have a really good sounding drums and a really good drummer, and you put the microphones in the right place, you're going to get great sounding drums. If the drums sound like garbage can covers, there's not much you can do about that. And if you don't have a really good drummer, there's not much you can do about that, unless you're in a position to be able to fire him and get Jeff Porcaro or somebody like Vinny Colaiuta or those guys. So that's pretty much it. It all depends on the drummer and how the kit is tuned. I think that's most important.
We have a question from Chris Dendulk. Hi, Al. Big fan of your huge natural sound. How do you treat your stereo bus?
Oh, I just thought I mentioned how I treat the stereo bus. It goes into the Fairchild and into the ATI, and then I can A/B my mix with what's going into the Tube Tech and what's going into the ATI, and I make my adjustments that way, and then I go back and forth, and I add, some high end, but way up at the top end. It kind of gives some air to it, and then as far as compression on the Tube Tech, it's a dB, maybe a dB and a half on the low end, maybe a dB on the mid range, maybe a little bit at the high end, or maybe none, depending on what I need. I use my ears, and I go back and forth between my mix and what's coming out of that, and make my adjustments that way. It's important to use your ears. If you know what good records sound like, then you should be okay and know how to adjust.
We have a question from John Gorham. Hi, Al. What SPL do you typically listen at when mixing?
I'm sorry, I didn't get that question. What?
What SPL? A sound pressure level, I assume.
Oh, wow. I don't mix very loud. I don't record very loud. I think that's one of the reasons I've probably been able to do it for a long time. Um, yeah, if I'm working with a good rock and roll band and they want to hear it gangbusters on the playback, I'll show them where the volume knob is, and I'll walk out of the room and they can crank it up. I've been able to do this most of my life, and it's probably one of the reasons I was still making good records when I was 80 and 85 years old.
We have a question from Sam Sergi. Hey Al, can you talk about the guitar feedback at the beginning of The Ballad of You and Me and Pooh Neal by Jefferson Airplane? Such an amazing song.
Oh yeah, that was insane times. Um, yeah, I don't know. I can't even remember back to exactly what we did on that. I remember doing those albums. I did 4 albums I produced with the airplane. I did After Bathing at Bax's, Crown of Creation, Bless Its Pointed Little Head, and Volunteers. And, there was so much going on at that time. We were getting visitors coming all the time. And it was just pretty hard to concentrate on exactly what we were doing. It got to be more like a hangout than anything. So, that might be. I wasn't the engineer on those records. I was just the producer. So that's a question to go back to the engineer. I know my brother Richie was the engineer at the time and a really good engineer, and so I left that all up to him. If there's something I didn't like the way the bass sounded, I would say something and we would work on that. But in general, I left that pretty much up to the engineer at the time. I would only make comments when I thought it would be something constructive.
We have a question from Sound and Wires. Can you identify any life-changing workflow or gear changes you've had throughout your career?
Wow. Well, the first gear change was when we got the first tape machine. The first gear change was we got a 300 mono Ampex tape machine, and that was a major change. Tommy Dowd and I we couldn't believe it because you could edit and do things that you couldn't do on acetate. So that was one. Then at that time, uh, Neumann or Telefunken, as it was called back in they came out with the U-47, and that was a major change. Before then, we were using a lot of ribbon mics and cardioid microphones, and when the tube mics came out, it was a major change. And back then, you could buy a brand new U-47 for $300. So Tommy and I were in heaven when we got those and learned how to use them and we had great experience using 77DX RCAs or the 44 RCA or 639 Western Electric. But we learned how to use the ribbon microphones and dynamic microphones. But when the tube mics came out, it just opened a new worlds for us, especially on vocals and things.
We have a next question from Nick Broste. Hi Al, what's your work life like now during this pandemic?
Well, pretty nil. I don't have a studio at the house. One of the few engineers I know that don't. I never wanted a studio in the house because I'm the kind of guy that I'm so anal about things that I'd be sleeping at 2 in the morning. I'd wake up and say, do I have enough bass on that? I'd go downstairs into the studio and try to readjust. I would probably never get any sleep. So I try to stay away from having one in the house. I have to tell you, with this pandemic that's going on now, I miss that. I wish I had one in the house now so I could do some work or just fool around with the mixes or work with other people on things. I can't do that at this point. And we're trying to hopefully this pandemic goes away and we can all get back into the studio and do what we do best and what we love.
We have a question from Tony Hinterholzinger from Germany.
Oh,
How
Tony.
close is how close is your UAD Capital Chamber preset to the real deal? Using it and loving it a lot, but I was wondering.
Yeah, you know what? I use it. There is no preset for me. I use the chamber just the way it is. It's chamber number 4, and as you know, you can get it now. UA has it out, and I use it that way. I don't add anything to it or do anything. No delay. I use it just the way it is. I love the way it sounds. It sounds great on vocals. It sounds great on strings, on brass. Um, yeah, I'm thrilled with the live chambers at Capitol, and they have 8 of them there. And when I get the chance, I can use 2 or 3 at a time, and use different ones on different instruments. It's a great tool, and have a great echo chamber. I know when Tommy Dowd and I were working at a studio called Fulton, there was a room next to the control room. We didn't have a live chamber at that point. So we used that room as a live chamber, and we shellacked the room. We put about 9 coats of shellac on the room to get it to sound the way we wanted, to get the right bounce and so forth. And that's what we did. And we would go in once a month and re-shellac the room. And uh, there's nothing like a great live chamber. Um, so if you have one, or you have an opportunity to use one, check it out.
We have a question from Noah Cole. What can you tell us about working on Turn Up the Quiet? The vocals in particular are startling. The whole album is incredible.
Uh, that's Diana Krall, and I've been working with Diana for, I don't know, 30 years almost. I think I've done 13 albums with her. And on her vocal, we have a sleeve that fits over the piano, and with flaps where we can put the microphones in to capture the piano sound. And I use 2 M149s on a piano, one over the low end of the strings and one over the high end of the strings, right up near where the hammers are. And then on her vocal, it's a 47, the Frank Sinatra microphone. Before that, before we were able to do that, and we were recording in New York, I used a great Neumann U67 on her vocal. That was great. But once she heard the Frank Sinatra microphone, boy, her eyes lit up, and she said, first thing she said, "What is this?" And I told her that it was the mic Frank used, and she was really happy. And I used the microphone. It's about 8 inches from her, and there's a windscreen. And I put it in a great Neve preamp, and then from the preamp it goes into a Fairchild tube compressor, and I tap it about 2 dB, and that's pretty much it. And the rest is her, and it's just capturing her voice. And I love working with her. She's just amazing.
We have a message here from Carlos Plaza. Hello, Al. Been a while since 2016. Glad to see you live.
Oh, that's so sweet. Thank you so much. I hope all is well with you. My life is great. I'm happily married to a wonderful woman for 30 years. And in this pandemic, she happens to be an amazing cook. And she has a bunch of recipes from when we do Mix with the Masters in Provence. So I'm getting all this great cooking and just being well taken care of. And we have 3 dogs and a cat, and we have a beautiful backyard. And we're just trying to stay safe and stay away from this coronavirus. And I hope everybody is doing the same thing. And if you do go out, please make sure you wear a mask, not so much to protect you, but to protect others from you. Anyway, thank you. That's a great question, and thanks so much.
We have a question from Benoit. Hi Al, how do you deal with mixed revisions? And does it happen that you don't completely agree with an artist's vision or desires? Thanks.
Oh, yeah, there's many times I'm not sure I agree with what an artist really wants, but I will do my best to convince them that I'm right. But if I can't, I learned a long time ago it's the artist record. Their name goes on the front of the album. My name, if I'm lucky, goes on the back. So the most important thing is to make sure that the artist is happy. And if they want something that you're not quite happy with, you try to convince them. But if you can't, then you have to go along with it. It's an artist record, and and that's who people buy the records for. At least most people.
We have a question from Mohit. Hi Al, greetings from Mumbai, India. Could you please shed some light on the Taj Mahal recording session? How did you manage to pull that off? And it seems like an impossible task today. Thank you.
Yeah, it was an impossible task. We went to see Gandhi, um, um, who was the prime minister at the time, and he gave Paul Horn and I permission to to go to the Taj Mahal and record. So we got there. We could only record at night because they wanted to make sure the tourists there had their opportunity to get in and see the Taj Mahal. So we went in at night, and it was Paul and me and a cantor, a guy that's doing verb, and we had to sit there and wait until the top of the Taj Mahal is open, and the pigeons come in and settle in there at night. So it took quite a while for the sun to go down, the pigeons to come in and settle down, so we couldn't hear the cooing and all that. And when they finally did settle down, we were able to then start recording. Well, one of the things about the Taj Mahal is the reverb in there is like 14 and a half seconds. So in the middle of one take, we're recording and everything's going along great, and we hear splat, bap, 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 and it was pigeon shit. Pigeon would hit it, and it would just echo reverb through. So we'd have to stop that take and wait till that finished, and then go back in and start recording some more. Um, we used a little DAT machine at the time, and I had two mics, one for Paul on his flute. He had about 8 different kinds of flutes, wooden flutes, and all different kinds. And we had a cantor who was doing some vocals, and I used one mic on him. It was one of the most amazing experiences of my life. Um, India was an amazing place to visit. Um, it also brought tears to my eyes every day when I would see all the poverty there, children, who didn't have much to eat, had to beg. But the recording, it was an experience I'll never forget. Anyway, I hope that answers the question.
We have a question from Tim Drum. Hey Al, big fan and loved your book, especially the story about recording the Ellington Band on your first day solo. Question: favorite snare mic and typical EQ tweaks or tips?
You know, I don't use EQ. 99% of my records don't have any EQ on them. I use my microphones for EQ. If I want something a little brighter, I use a brighter microphone, or I place the mic differently, or so forth. So I just don't. We didn't have EQ when I started. We had one equalizer, a cinema equalizer. And if you added it, it equalized everything because everything was mono back then. So we never used it, Tommy and I. So we learned our EQ is on microphones. So, I through the years, I've learned what mics sound best on brass, what might sound best on woodwinds and saxophones and vocals, and that's what I do. If I don't like the sound of what I'm getting with the micro, I change the mic and I'll use something else until I can get exactly what I want. And I don't use a lot of compression, um, as little as possible. So most of what I do is hand working. When I'm recording, I'm placing things where I want them in the mix, and I'm balancing things. I'm moving, like when the trumpets go from tutti open, wide open, and then 4 bars later they go to hum and mutes. I know my assistant, usually Steve Chenowick, will give me a cue. He'll say 2 bars, they go to mutes, Al. So I know in 2 bars, I push up those microphones and I get the muted sounds from the trumpets exactly where I want them. So later on, I don't have to do that. It's done. So that's it. I try to do everything I possibly can while I'm recording, so to make my life easier when I'm mixing.
We have
That's
a
it.
question from Mark. How far do you place the 414s from a Leslie recording Hammond?
How far do I'm
Do you place the
the four?
AKG 414s? Yeah,
I know that, Mike. How far from what?
from a Leslie recording Hammond.
Oh, okay, Leslie cabinet. I use two 414s, and I put one on each side, and they're about, oh, I would guess maybe a foot and a half, depending, sometimes a little more. And then I've been using a FET 47 down on the low end. And that's been pretty much it. Then it's up to the organist to do his swells and his dynamics. And it's up to me to capture that.
We have a question from Chris. Hey Al, thanks for signing my copy of your book at the Capitol Records Hackathon a few months ago. I was
Uh,
wondering if you could talk about your approach on the multi-band compressor on the mix bus.
well, my approach to the multi-band compressor, and we all know what that is. Um, and I just, I start out with no compression, and then I'll add a little bit to the low end, and then I'll add a little to the mid range, and then a little to the top end, and then maybe I'll take off some of the low end. It's almost like balancing uh, the low, mid, and high end on the compressor, and it's very little. If it's 2 dB, it's almost too much. So it's just a little bit. And I love tube sounds. So anytime I can use a tube, whether it's a Fairchild or the Tube Tech, I do.
We have a question from Greg. I know you don't use any EQ when mixing your own recordings. Is that the same when you mix other people's mixes? And how do you get everything to set together with no EQ?
Well, the way I get it together with no EQ is by recording it correctly in the first place. So, I want when people come in and hear a playback to say, oh man, that sounds great. Or oh boy, that's it. So all I know is that I just have to, when I'm mixing, do a little tweaking with echo and so forth, so forth. And what was the first part of the question?
Is that the same when you mix other people's mixes?
Oh yeah, no. When I get other people's mixes, sometimes I have to use EQ to get things to fit right. Um, you know, I you know some engineers I get to mix something and it sounds great and I don't have to do much of anything. But when I have to start cranking EQ or something, then I start worrying because the more EQ you use, the more phasing problems you have. And so I try to stay away from that as much as possible. But if I have to brighten something that someone else gave me, I will, or I have to readjust the low end with some EQ, I'll do that. But I just use what I have to use until something sounds really good in my ear.
We have a question from, I hope I'm pronouncing correctly, Jaume. Hi from the Balearic Islands. How and
Whoa.
how often do you chill out and relax your ears?
As often as I possibly can, actually. Um, I don't, I don't listen to a lot of music now. Since the pandemic, I'm sitting at home listening to a lot of older records I've done and older records that other people have done that they admire their work. But I try to rest my ears. I don't put a lot of hours in the studio. If I'm there 10 hours, that's it, usually it. The days when we used to work on a mix and then sleep on the couch for 4 or 5 hours and get up and start working on the mix again, those days are gone for me. I can't do that anymore. So I try to rest my ears as much as possible. I don't listen to things loud. And, um, and again, I'm always discovering new records and new sounds. And there are times when I'll call an engineer on the phone and say, "Hey man, I heard that record you did with so and so. How did you get that sound on whatever?" And they'll always tell me, or people will call me and ask. So it's we don't have any secrets. We try to do the best we can, and try to. I try to teach as much as I can to my assistants and to anybody else. I have an open door when I'm mixing, especially if the client isn't around. People come in all the time and watch what I'm doing, and they'll come over and ask me questions, and I'll explain why I do certain things, or Steve will explain to them why I'm doing something. So I'm constantly trying to rest my ears and not overtax them, but I'm also constantly trying to teach.
We have a question from Sound and Wires. Are there any particular mix workflows or experiences from your past that leave you not feeling nostalgic when you think back to them?
Boy, yeah. Well, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of records that I hear now. I just was listening to a bunch of records I did with Joe Sample a while ago, and Joe's gone now, and it just brings back so many memories of how great it was working with Joe, Joe and Willie Nelson on some projects, and just Joe, and what a great pianist he was, and just trying to get the best piano sound that anybody ever heard, and working on that. Piano is one of the more difficult things to record. So to get that right is you got to work on it, and you got to know what mics to use and where to put them. And I've been using on piano my Neumann M149s, and I'm thrilled to death with the way they sound. So that's it. Nostalgic. Yeah, I listen to records that I've done in my early days, and think, oh boy, I could have done that a hell of a lot better. And I listen to some of the mistakes I've made, uh, and I vow not to make those same mistakes ever again. So yeah, I learned from older records I've done and from records other people have done that I admire, and that's it. I'm trying to learn every day. If you go into the studio every day and you don't learn something, something's wrong. You got to learn something every day.
We have a question from Marco. Where do you place the mic on a guitar cabinet?
Oh, it varies depending on how loud they're playing or whatever on the cabinet. Usually it's fairly close, 2, 3 inches away. Sometimes, um, when I was doing Toto with Lukather, we had one mic about 5 or 6 inches from the cabinet, And then about 12 feet away, I had another microphone in Omni, um, a Neumann mic, and to capture the room because he did play pretty loud. But we got the impact from the close mic and then the ambience from the mic that was out in the room.
We have a question from Boulevard Recording. Hey Al, Clay Blair from the old producer's workshop down the street. What do you do when you need to mix and can't access a desk? Have you had any luck in the box?
No, you know what? Nico Bolas, who's one of my dearest friends, he had a little room upstairs at Capitol. And I went up and he was mixing in the box. So we took a song and he said, come on. So I mixed it in the box up there. And it sounded really good. But then we took that same song downstairs into Studio C and I mixed it on the analog desk. And it sounded so much better to both of us. We both looked at one another. So I stay away from the box as much as I can. I really am not good at mixing in the box.
We have a question from Ricardo. Hi Al, thanks for sharing your knowledge. What are your favorite tube microphones for vocals?
Oh, well, I would guess the U47 is my favorite for vocals. But I've used, I've used the 149 on certain voices. Obviously, Capitol's got the 48, the U48, which is the original Sonata mic, a Neumann U48. That's great. It depends on the voice. But in general, the mic I start with is the Neumann U47. And if that doesn't work, then I'll go to something else and try a few different things. But sometimes I'll put 2 or 3 mics up if it's a vocalist I've never recorded, and I'll have them sing in each one and decide which one I like the best. Or we'll record a little of it each and have the vocalist hear it and decide what they're happiest with. So yeah, it's when in doubt, go to a Neumann U47.
We have a question from Tim Drum. What's the most common recording or miking mistake you hear on tracks recorded by beginner engineers?
Out of phase is one of the major problems with beginners, and sometimes it's too much EQ that they're using, making things much too bright. And the more you use EQ, the more phasing problems you're going to have on the desk. So I think phasing is the thing that everybody should be really careful about. That's probably one of the most common errors.
We have a question from Ari. What was the mic setup like for the strings and horns on the Mancini sessions, particularly the songs like Experiment in Terror or Lujon?
Well, the microphones were Neumann U47s, and they were about 10, 12 feet above the section. And on the violins, I used 4 of them. And on the violas, I used 2 of them. And then on the cello, I used some RCA back then, ribbon microphones, the 77DX on the cello. That's pretty much it. On the flutes, I used M149s, and I had 2 of them on the flutes. On the trombones, I was using 77 RCA 77DXs, and on the trumpets, I was using the Neumann U47, and I had them in Omni. So I embrace the leakage in the room as much as I can. So if you have good sounding mics and things are leaking into them, you're going to have good sounding leakage, and that makes things sound a little more depth and you just get more of the quality of the instrument. Um, and that's it. If you use cheap microphones and you're getting leakage, you're getting cheap leakage, and that sounds really. I hate that sound, and so I stay away from that. So I use great microphones. I use a lot of them in the omni position because I want to embrace the sound of the room, and that's the way I work.
Al, we're almost 1 hour in. Is it okay to answer two or three more questions?
Sure.
Great. So next question from Truth Studios. Hi Al, thanks for taking the time to talk with us. Do you charge a flat fee as an engineer or take a royalty? Or both? What percentage do you typically go for with a project?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the first part of that question.
Do you charge a flat fee as an engineer or take a royalty?
Yeah, no. I if I'm mixing, I charge a flat fee and I get a point on the record. And when I'm recording, I charge a flat fee for the day, but I don't get any royalties. Just a flat rate.
We have a question from Pat Hundley. I still wear a tie to all my recording sessions. When did the clothing attire start to change? Cheers from Vegas.
Well, years ago when I very first, when I was little and I would go to my uncle's studio, some of the technicians wore white coats, white jackets, but that went out. But everybody, when I started in New York, everybody wore jackets, shirts, ties. Everybody always looked nice. Sometimes we take our jacket off when we were working, but we always had a tie, and we always looked good. We always took showers, and we always had some sort of breath mints around. Uh, so if somebody offered you a breath mint, you knew you should take it because you probably had bad breath at the time. Uh, anyway, so yeah, being clean and looking good is just part of your job, and it's a simple thing to do. So you know, I used to I'd see guys go in with torn T-shirts and jeans that smelled bad and looked like they were working under a car. And would you go to a bank like that if you worked at a bank? I know it's a whole different thing, but it's people when they walk in want to see everybody looking good, and hopefully everybody smells good and not too much. You don't want to add too much cologne because that's worse than none. So a little bit of it, and looking nice. You don't have to wear a tie, but you can wear a nice clean shirt, clean pair of jeans, and and again, as I said, if somebody offers you a breath mint, take it. You probably need it.
Okay, we have one last question from Jonathan. Hello from the Netherlands. Do you still experiment in your spare time? Thank you.
What do I experiment in my off time? Wow, I don't not much of anything. I like to read, so I'm reading a lot. Uh, I'm reading a book now on a book that's just coming out on Tommy LaPuma that I'm into now. Um, I enjoy reading. I enjoy writing. It was fun writing my book with Maureen Droney. I hope everybody had a chance to read that. There's a lot of good information in that book and on little tips on how to do certain things and some of my experiences that maybe you can learn from. Uh, that's pretty much it. Right now, with this terrible news and this guy that we have as a president here in the United States is driving everybody crazy. So I'm hoping that we can get rid of this pandemic and vote him out of office and get back to a normal way of life. I miss taking my wife out to good restaurants and enjoying dinner and enjoying seeing my friends. I happen to be a guy that likes to hug. I miss hugging people. Shaking hands, I don't care about. Bumping elbows is okay. But hugging, I do miss. And I can't do that now. So anyway, that's it.
Thank you, Al.
Watching. Oh, okay. Is that it? Was that enough? Did everybody get enough info?
That was great. Let's do it again. I mean, that was amazing. Thanks so much for answering to so many questions, Al. And we're all sending you big hugs from all around the world, and we hope to hug you again very soon. And let's do another chat soon. I mean, everybody's on
Anytime you
lockdown,
want, Victor.
and we'll
Cool.
connect, and we'll do it again very soon. Thanks for taking the time to answer to all
You're
the
welcome.
questions. And
Thank you,
and
Victor. Thank you, Victor, for helping me get this set up. I was having a lot of problems. As
No,
you
that's
know, I'm
great.
not the most technical guy in the world.
Yeah, right. No, it's we're hearing and seeing you very well, and thanks everybody for connecting. Stay safe. We'll do it again soon with Al, and
God bless you
we'll
all.
see you soon.
God bless everybody. Thank you
And
so
go
much.
and get Al Schmidt's book. It's a great time to read it at home. Order it online, and if you have it, read it again if you read it already. And then we'll have more questions next time with Al. Thanks, Al. See you soon.
Okay, thank you. What a joy.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Whoa.